It can be a mess trying to figure out the cruise protocols today versus maybe what you experienced earlier this year or even last year. So today, I've got to look what the cruise protocols look like now, up next. Hey everyone, it's Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and one of the most common questions I get is about cruise protocols. And if you have a cruise coming up here in the end of 2022 or even looking forward into 2023, what are the protocols? What do you have to do? And there are people that are still asking about masks on board, vaccine, testing, and other sorts of requirements on board cruises. A lot of this is based on protocols that were in place months or even years ago. But today I wanted to kind of set the record straight because after all, I want to make sure that if you're going on a cruise soon, you're well prepared for it. And certainly these protocols could evolve and change at any point. But I do think it's important to kind of use this moment in time right here to set a new milestone. Because if you haven't been paying that close attention to the protocols, I get it. You're not all like me and you're all following every single daily change out there. Hopefully this video is going to help you understand what has changed and what to expect going forward. So I'm going to go basically protocol by protocol, the major categories of things that I get the most questions about to help you understand what you should expect on board your cruise. I think it makes the most sense to start off with the biggest topic of them all, which is vaccine requirements. And beginning with cruises September 5th, Royal Caribbean dropped the vaccine requirement for cruises that sail from any U.S. or European itinerary that doesn't visit Canada or Bermuda. So if your cruise sails out of Florida, if it sails out of Galveston, San Juan, Puerto Rico, New Orleans, and almost every single European home port with a couple of exceptions, you don't need to be vaccinated in order to go on that particular cruise. If you have an Alaska cruise left still for this year, maybe you're doing a Canada-New England cruise, or your cruise is going to Bermuda, then that is not the case. And if you're unvaccinated, you're still unable to sail because of the requirements of those countries. And as a result, it's still back to the old rules, if you will, which is that the only unvaccinated on board can be up to the age of 12. But everything else is pretty much in the clear, so you're good to go. Now, you should be aware, by the way, when we talk about this and any protocols in this video, it could change at any time. So just because this is the protocol today doesn't mean this won't be the protocol next week, next month, or whenever. So you got to keep up with it. But again, I wanted to give everybody kind of an update on this, a refresh, because a lot has changed, especially in the last couple of weeks. Speaking of that, protocols for each sailing are confirmed via email and on the Royal Caribbean website no less than 30 days before you sail. Should the protocols for your sailing change upon that confirmation and you're unable to travel due to your vaccination status, then Royal Caribbean will move you to a new sailing where your vaccination status is accepted or provide you a refund. So some good peace of mind there. Now, regardless of the fact if you're vaccinated or not, Royal Caribbean is still going to ask you for your vaccination status, and that is to ensure, as they say, to achieve a highly vaccinated environment on their cruise ships. Guests who do not wish to disclose their vaccination status are welcome to sail. Their reservation will not be impacted or canceled if they don't wish to provide the vaccination status, but they may need to follow the protocols for unvaccinated guests, which we'll get to in just a second. There are still a few regions of the world where your vaccination status is still required to be disclosed, as an example, Australia. And in that situation, you are going to need to provide documentation of vaccination for passengers embarking on those sailings. Next up is COVID testing. So again, as of September 5th, Royal Caribbean made this really simple, assuming your cruise does not visit Canada or Bermuda. Vaccinated guests won't have to take a pre-cruise test on cruises that are shorter than 10 nights. So if you're vaccinated and going on a cruise that doesn't visit Canada or Bermuda, less than 10 nights, you don't need a COVID test, period, end of story. It's that easy. You just get on board the ship like the old days. Anybody that's unvaccinated, 5 and up, will need to take a test within 3 days of boarding, regardless of cruise length. Now, that protocol I just talked about is really for the U.S. sailings, and that's assuming you're not visiting Canada or Bermuda, and there are more exceptions and specific rules for testing from cruise ports all around the world. So if your cruise is going out of Europe, Australia, or Singapore, the protocols do vary. So this is the part of the video where I either could spend the next 15 minutes talking to you about every single protocol, in which most of you, your eyes would glaze over and exit this video and watch that kid singing the corn video instead. I'm going to just defer you to go check out the Royal Caribbean website. It's really easy to find the testing protocols for your cruise. When you go to the Royal Caribbean website, go to the top corner of the page, click on the protocols, and then there's an option there for testing and seeing everything that you need in order to find the testing protocols for you. The bottom line, though, is if you're on a cruise that's probably out of the U.S. or probably out of Europe, not visiting certain countries of the world, and if you're vaccinated, you don't need a COVID test. Otherwise, there are protocols in place. Something else you should know about the testing, by the way, whether you are unvaccinated or not, is that Royal Caribbean has greatly relaxed the testing protocols. You can do either a PCR or antigen test. It can be professionally proctored by a healthcare professional, like using one of those awesome home tests from emed.com, or you could do a self-administered test. This means you can actually take one of those tests that's not proctored, one of those maybe free ones you got from the government, and you could do that without being supervised. So this is a big change because up until recently, any home tests that were allowed were only for vaccinated folks, and they had to be proctored. And now that has been greatly expanded, so it's a lot easier to get a pre-cruise COVID test should you need it for your sailing. Now let's talk about the check-in process and getting to your cruise, because that's an important thing. And the interesting thing here is really nothing has changed, but if you haven't been paying attention, well, here's a good update for you. Before your cruise, about 45 days beforehand, you'll be able to check in for your cruise via the Royal Caribbean app. It's really important you do that because that is when you get a check-in time. And yes, the check-in times do matter, so it's a really good idea to get one. All you need to do is download the Royal Caribbean app on your phone, go log into it exactly 45 days before your cruise, and you'll be able to select a time for your check-in. It's just that easy. And then leading up to your check-in, you just need to fill out the rest of the stuff that's in there, like your personal information. The more you do here, the more time you save in the terminal. So if you're asking, should I bother with this? Can I just do it at the terminal? Yeah, you could do it in the terminal, but it's going to take you longer. If you're like me, you just want to get on board that cruise ship and not waste time in the terminal filling out things you could have done beforehand, especially when someone else is filling it out for you, and they take longer to fill it all out. So do yourself a favor, do that process ahead of time, and you're good to go. Other than that, the process of actually getting to the terminal is pretty much the same. You'll arrive within time of your check-in time. I tell people within 15 minutes is totally fine. If you have the key, well, then you have a separate time there. And if you booked a suite, well, then your suite concierge will let you know if there is an option for you to come in earlier than your check-in time. Look for an email about a week before your cruise from the concierge to let you know about any flexible arrangements. Usually, suite guests get flexible arrival time of plus or minus an hour. So if your check-in time that you got via the app was 10:30 a.m., yes, you could show up at 9:30 a.m. for your check-in time. But again, wait for that email from the suite concierge. Once on board the ship, then yes, you'll be doing the eMuster process. So no, you don't have to go outside anymore if you haven't cruised since 2020. There's no more going to your muster station in the afternoon with everybody else standing in line and listening to the safety drill. You don't have to do that. On the day of your cruise, you can certainly go into the Royal Caribbean app and watch a couple of videos in there. Basically, you watch a safety demonstration, you listen to the emergency horn, and then all you have to do is go down to your muster station where you're assigned, and they will scan you in so that you know where the location of your muster station is, and that's it. Not a big stop to your day. It only takes about a minute or two if you do the safety protocols via the app. It's so easy, and I love it. And this really has not changed since last year. So basically, when you get on board the ship, my advice is go have lunch. Make sure you have a little more energy. While you're eating lunch, watch the safety video, listen to the emergency drill in the app while you're, eating there. You can multitask. And then when you're done with that, go to your muster station, check in there, and you're done. It's super easy. Another really common question about protocols is having to wear a mask and what the mask rules are on board. What if you're unvaccinated? Do you need to wear a mask? What if my kids are unvaccinated? Do they need to wear a mask? And the answer is no. Masks are optional for vaccinated guests and recommended for unvaccinated children while on board. Some destinations may still require masks, as in you get off the ship for a shore excursion and a mask may be required there. Again, it depends on the country. But when you're on board the ship, masks are no longer required. Royal Caribbean dropped the mask requirement earlier this spring. And even if you're unvaccinated, even if your kids are going to Adventure Ocean and they're unvaccinated, they do not need a mask. The mask rules have basically been completely replaced, and we're back to essentially optional, the way it was, however you want to look at it. But you don't need to wear a mask unless required. In terms of the cruise terminals, you don't need to wear a mask either. There are some exceptions and local requirements. I know at one point, Los Angeles, California, required to have masks in the terminal. But again, those protocols can change at any time. The bottom line is you probably don't need a mask, especially on board the ship. You're pretty much safe to go. The only exception could be certain places your ship visits while on land. So off the ship, like I said, a cruise terminal, perhaps a certain country, they may still require it. But again, in my experience, going on cruises over the last couple months, they really don't need them at all. Speaking of Adventure Ocean, if you might want to know about what Adventure Ocean is like, as you heard some stories about some of the limitations on Adventure Ocean from last year, the good news is that is all gone. For all intents and purposes, Adventure Ocean is back to the way it was. There is no more limited capacity. There's no more registrations in terms of having to sign up for a specific time. You still need to register your kids, but there's no time slots or anything like that. And there's no mask required whether you're vaccinated or not to go into Adventure Ocean. It's basically the same old way it was before. There are, of course, limits on the amount of kids that go into Adventure Ocean. That's based on truly the full capacity of the room, fire codes and whatnot. In reality, it's pretty difficult to get to that level. There's not that many kids that usually go to Adventure Ocean to the point where they'd reach that limit. So yes, there is technically a limit, but it's not like it was, if you remember what Adventure Ocean was like earlier this winter, in which you had, limitations on the amount of kids that can be in there. It's no longer the rat race in order to get a time slot for your kids. It's pretty much good to go. There's no more circles that the kids have to stand in or anything like that. It's all back and it's all pretty much normal. In terms of other activities on board the ship, truly the one activity that's still not available to do is the Quest. The Quest is the adult scavenger hunt on board Royal Caribbean cruise ships. The Quest was just something that a lot of people really enjoyed because it was zany. I don't know if anyone describes anything with the word zany anymore, but I do. And it was off the wall, a lot of fun, good time has had by all, but it has not returned yet. It's probably the most notable activity on board that has not returned yet. The all-access behind-the-scenes tours have returned, but not quite yet these Quest games. The intention is it will show up at some point. Royal Caribbean will bring it back, but it just hasn't happened yet. And quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it came back even a couple days after this video came out. So keep an eye on it. Certainly check out RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com on our message boards. People are always sharing when the Quest comes back and all those kinds of things. So we'll have more updates on that. And talking about Adventure Ocean and the limitations we had over there, it also reminds me about the vaccinated versus unvaccinated zones. If you remember back to 2021, Royal Caribbean had certain areas of the ship that if you were unvaccinated, you could not go into. The casino, certain bars, and whatnot. Anyway, those are all gone. You don't need to worry about vaccinated versus unvaccinated zones. Whether you're vaccinated or not, you'll be able to go to every single part of the Royal Caribbean ship. There are no limitations there. In terms of shore excursions, pretty much all ports are back to open again. A lot of ports used to have certain restrictions on vaccinated versus unvaxxed, but that's all gone now. You can book your shore excursions either through Royal Caribbean or on your own. It does not matter if you're vaccinated or not. Again, there could be a country or two that requires unvaccinated guests to do certain tours, but they're really few and far between. I can't even think of them what they are besides maybe Canada, of course, but they wouldn't be allowed in the first place. So regardless of that fact, you're pretty much good to go. Check the protocols for where you're going, but in honesty, if you're doing a Caribbean cruise, if you're doing a European cruise, those protocols are pretty much out the window. And with that, that pretty much wraps up our look at the protocols for what they are today versus what they used to be. Basically, if you were used to the protocols from earlier this year, especially around March and April timeframe, in which we had a lot of different rules compared to now, a lot of them are out the window. And the really big change is, as we've talked about in other videos, is that now if you're unvaccinated, you are able to go on a cruise regardless of age, and there are very few exceptions. Truly, the one area in which you might still have some of the old protocols are cruises that visit either Bermuda or Canada, and in that situation, it's up to the Canadian or Bermudian officials to change those protocols. It's not Royal Caribbean. It's not their choice. They're adhering to the protocols of the countries they're visiting. So if that's upsetting to you, if suddenly you can't do that cruise that you wanted to do to one of these countries, understand it's not Royal Caribbean. It is the country, and it's what it is, and hopefully they will change in the future. Let me know in the comments below if you've gone on a cruise recently, especially with some of these new protocols that began this month in September, what you think of them, and whether or not you like the changes that are there, and what other changes do you want to see in the protocols. Let me know in the comments below. Keep it civil, please. While you're down below the video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. That way, YouTube lets you know when we have a brand new video to share. This has been Matt from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.